Alright, so we are staying with this strong representation of Attila University and also with the topic of problem-based learning. So welcome to everyone who has just come in and also for those who stayed. And give the floor to Attila. And let's give him a big hand.
Thank you very much. So my name is Attila. I come from University, and actually I'm in the same research group as Kata, so basically my presentation is a follow-up presentation. However, probably in terms of empirical research, it's a predecessor of Attili's presentation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about EFL teachers' experiences with problem-based learning in the EFL classroom. So I'm going to talk about problem-based learning in general, so I'm going to identify the core features, also revise or gain a deeper insight into the methods that might be similar to problem-based learning, and this is an important part because when we are identifying the core features, we're going to see that there are several methods which are similar to problem-based learning. Then I'm going to talk about our study that we conducted and the results, and then we have some suggestions for teachers, and then I'm going to conclude the presentation So problem-based learning, I mean, if you look at the literature, is defined as a student-centered approach or teaching method in which new content is learned through solving problems, complex problems, or structured problems. As also my colleague Kata said, that problem-based learning originates from medical education, in which medical students receive a lot of amount of factual material, and they cannot see the relevance, and that's why problem-based learning actually helps medical students to digest these huge amounts of materials. Okay, usually there is a 6 or 7 step problem-based cycle that helps to navigate through the problem-based learning classroom, for example. Okay, so first students identify facts after the problem was presented to them. Then they can generate hypotheses in connection with the possible solution. Then they have to identify knowledge deficiencies, so they have to realize that what information is necessary for solving the problems. For example, I'm going to give you an example that Kata has already mentioned, in which students have to redesign a canteen. Then obviously they have to collect information in connection with the financial issues involved in redesigning a canteen, probably interior design. So there are so many different subfields that might be relevant for solving the problems. So that's where they do research, so they collect information in connection with this, and then they have to reapply this knowledge to solve the problem. That's an important step. And finally, they have to evaluate their hypothesis and also engage in self-reflection or self-assessment, and then also reflecting on the abstract knowledge that they have mastered. Okay, so what I did is that I reviewed the literature in order to identify the core features of problem-based learning, and I looked at one of the most, so basically the origins of problem-based learning by Barrows. So he came up with 6 core features, and also another article which is highly cited by Savory 2015, so the original one and the more recent one. And then I compiled these core features into one, and that I used for analyzing the interviews. Okay, so as Barrows stated, so problem-based learning is a student-centered learning approach. Students are responsible for the learning process. They are also responsible for sharing the information after they have collected the information in connection with the different subdisciplines. They work in small groups, so groups of 3 or 5. In this way, they can improve their collaborative skills, which is also an important component of problem-based learning. Teachers are not knowledge providers in problem-based learning, but they are facilitators. That's an important feature. Problems serve as the basis for learning. Also, problems are tools basically to foster problem-solving skills. So that's how we can improve students' problem-solving skills. And then, as we have seen in the problem-based cycle, students engage in self-directed learning. So that's where they collect information, they identify knowledge deficiencies, and then they reapply the new knowledge to solve the problems. Okay, Savory included some components that were not present in Barrows' framework. For example, final analysis and self and peer assessment. And these features are going to be really important because one of the main findings is that students in the EFL classroom don't ask the students to engage in self-assessment. Okay, so Savory also highlighted that problems should be structured, so problems should have more solutions, It's also important multidisciplinary learning, so students have to integrate from different fields of science to solve the a problem, so they have to integrate information from different parts of the fields. They have to collaborate, that's the same as in Barrows, and also Savory outlined that the last component is that PBL, so problem-based learning, should be the pedagogical foundation in the curriculum. Okay, so as I have mentioned before, there are several methods. We also talked about task-based language teaching today. So some teachers might confuse problem-based learning with task-based language teaching, and probably one of the most important distinction is that in problem-based learning, teachers act as facilitators, whereas in task-based language teaching, teachers are knowledge providers. Okay, problem-based learning is also confused with project-based learning, which is very similar. However, in terms of the focus, there is a difference. So in project-based learning, the focus is on the end product that the students actually create after, taking part in a project. Also, in project-based learning, teachers can be knowledge providers. Okay, so when it comes to research on problem-based learning in the EFL classroom, there is a relatively new study by Orkan, which is a meta-analysis that collected all the problem-based learning studies which actually investigated the effectiveness of problem-based learning on academic achievement, and the findings is that problem-based learning is highly effective on academic achievement. However, our knowledge is limited concerning students and also teachers' perceptions of problem-based learning, and we don't know how teachers actually use problem-based learning in the EFL classroom. So these research gaps actually directs us to our study that we conducted. So we were interested in that how EFL teachers apply problem-based learning in the EFL classroom, and then I also compared it, so the features that the teachers reported in their interviews, and I also compared it with the original features that I have outlined before. Okay, so let's have a look at our study. So the context is the same as Kata has already outlined. So that's the Hungarian context, which we have a standardized curriculum, and that might pose several challenges for implementing the problem-based learning method. Also, secondary education is highly exam-based, formal assessment, so that makes quite problematic for teachers to actually employ problem-based learning in the EFL classroom. However, teachers are creative, so they can still find places where they can use it. Okay, so we recruited 12 EFL teachers, and they were placed in 4 focus groups. These teachers were from elementary, secondary, and also from private language schools. Okay, so the data collection was, as I mentioned, focus group interviews. We created an interview guide, we piloted, and then basically the main goal was to ask the teachers to give descriptions, examples of problem-based learning in the EFL classroom. Okay, so in terms of the data analysis, I coded the interview transcript for the main characteristic features of problem-based learning, and I compared it with the original one, so whether there are certain differences. Okay, so these are the features that I compiled based on the 2, so based on Barrow's original criteria and Savory's criteria. There were 3 categories, so problems. So problems should be the basis for learning. Problems should be ill-structured. Problems are related to real life. That's really important because we have already mentioned that students are going to engage in the activity when they see that it's connected to real life, as the kormányablak or the government window example also shows that can happen in a real In terms of student roles, so the student is a student-centered approach. They are responsible for their own learning. They work in small groups. There is directed learning. They complete real-life activities. There is collaboration, so they collaborate with each other. Multidisciplinary, they apply their new knowledge, and then there is also that they engage in self and peer assessment. And then there's a final analysis, and the most important one was that the last one is that the teachers should act as facilitators and not knowledge providers. Okay, so let's see the results. So teachers reported 12 problem-based learning scenarios, and the percentages range from 29% to 87%, and the average was around 60%. Okay, so that's how I coded. So if there was some traces of, for example, of these features, then that scenario received a tick, and whereas there were some scenarios which were which didn't, I mean, the interview didn't include any traces or examples of the following features, then that scenario did not receive the tick. Okay, so when it comes to the application, so I'm going to give you just one example in which a teacher asked students to redesign a canteen, and that basically scenario took place in 3 subsequent classes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday in a 45-minute secondary school classroom. Okay, so the task was to redesign your school canteen with limited amount of money available. So that's basically can be considered as a problem because it might have different solutions. So you can collect money for in many different ways. You can redesign it again in many different ways. Okay, so the teacher created 3 groups of 4 or 5 students. Students started discussing what information is necessary to solve the problem. They collected information in connection with interior design, healthy diet, codes, so that's examples, the multidisciplinary learning, so from different disciplines. After that, they had to share information and discuss whose ideas would be accepted. Also, the teacher assigned responsibilities to each student, so this is how students were motivated to take part in the activity. For example, is an example excerpt from the interview. So I like to assign responsibilities to each student in a group because in this way, even the lazier students must also work on a particular task. Okay, so Wednesday, the students had to revisit the problem, and then also the students were assigned to another group. So kind of in this way, communication skills also could be improved. Students also could collect more information concerning the problem, and on the last day, so Friday, again reassigning to a different group, and then they could present the solutions in plenum. Okay, so suggestions for teachers. So based on these interviews, the most important is that teachers should carefully select a new structured problem that has more than one solution. So the careful selection is a highly important part of the problem-based learning design. Should be related to real life, so in this way we can motivate students. Also, to solve the problems, the students should integrate new information from many different disciplines. As far as the students' roles are concerned, so they have to collaborate. Also, students should be reassigned to another group after each session has expired. And then the most important one is that students should engage in self and peer assessment and the final analysis, which was missing from the interview. So basically saying that teachers do not necessarily ask their students to engage in self-assessment. Okay. And obviously we know from research on self-assessment that it has many benefits, and and that's why it would be important for EFL teachers to use it. Okay, as far as teachers' role, it's really important that teachers should act as facilitators, and I mean, obviously, a lot of teachers prefer and also they might be tempted to be knowledge providers, so that's why it's important for the teachers, imperative that they should act as facilitators. So in terms of conclusions, so there is a close alignment between the original features and the features that we have identified. However, EFL teachers do not exploit the full potential of problem-based learning. So one of the examples is that they don't use self and peer assessment. So here is the research group. As you can see, that Dr. Chisel is the leader of the research group, and also we have Attila, who was also part of the first presentation. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Attila. I've got a quick clarification question before we jump into substantive ones. What in the original framework is understood as an ill-posed or ill-constructed problem? Because I think that I might like reading that differently from the intention. So what's an ill-constructed problem?
Ill-structured. I think that's a kind of a complex problem, so it's not very simple in a sense that requires higher order skills to solve. Probably, I think that's what they mean by this.
That's not a trivial one.
Yeah.
In the plenary, some people consider trivial.
Thanks. All right, questions? This was such a non-trivial presentation that it's hard to come up with. Well, I have at least one regarding one of the slides earlier, where based on the literature, where it was argued that problem-based learning contributes to academic achievement, and I was wondering, from the point of view of language learning, and especially given the focus in Hungary on exams, where I expect that grammatical correctness is probably a big criterion, and it's not just communicative, fluency and being intelligible. So I was wondering to what extent having learners focus on the problem can be reconciled with the expectations that the utterance will be grammatically correct. Because typically, the focus on meaning may distract from focus on form. If you have thoughts on that.
So the question is that to what extent?
Yeah. So where the problem-based learning, like how to navigate problem-based learning so that the students still pay attention to grammatical form.
That's a good question. I think probably one option is that, when they talk in plenum, then probably grammatical correctness can be an important factor, but I think the whole approach is not necessarily, so that it's kind of a contradiction between the two things, so it's difficult to reconcile probably these two different approaches. But I would say that it's not the most important part of the curriculum, but I think problem-based learning can be a complementary approach that teachers can apply in the EFL classroom, at secondary schools and even at primary schools.
Thanks. Questions? We've got